July the 24th, 2012, and we're so honored to be with the Honorable Judge William L. Dawson at East Cleveland City Hall in his office. We want to take the opportunity to say thank you for allowing us to interview you for the East Cleveland documentation that we're having, and the documentary is going to be on famous people like yourself. So we are all excited about you being able to be a part of it. Before we get started, I wanted to take the opportunity to have you to tell us a little bit about yourself. You can look into the camera and just get us started, and then we can go right into the interview.
Okay. Well, I'm Judge William Dawson, but before that, I'm just William Dawson from East Cleveland. I was actually born and raised here in East Cleveland. My mother moved to East Cleveland on Orinoco Avenue along with my father, and they tell me the story that they were the first African-American couple on that particular street. And I guess if you travel through any of the East Cleveland streets, there's going to be somebody who can tell you that same story. But nevertheless, my parents told me that they were among the first African-American couples on that street. And that's where I was born and raised. I went to Chambers Elementary. That's where I started playing drums. I used to carry my big old drum to school. You know, I was a short young man, but I carried this drum that was half my size to Chambers every day. And that's kind of what put me on my track to continue with music. And I went to Kirk Middle School, continued in the band and theatrics there. And then I went to Shaw High School, graduated, stayed kind of near because I went to Kent State University, which obviously is not too far. It gave me the opportunity to still come home and make sure my mother was okay and stay in touch with my family. And after graduating from Kent State, when I was there, I actually majored in finance because my goal was to be a stockbroker. I figured I wanted to work on Wall Street, but I soon came to the understanding that in order to get those types of jobs, it's all about positioning. And unfortunately, Kent State at that time, and probably still today, is not the best school for that particular occupation. And that's, it's interesting. I'll do a bypass real quick. That's one of the things I try to instill in the young men and women that come before me in the court, all about positioning and making sure that you're doing the right thing for your future. So when I graduated from Kent State, I then began working for an insurance company as a claims adjuster, where I had an opportunity to deal with attorneys on the regular basis. And I said to myself, one day it just kind of hit me, and I said, wow, I can do what they're doing. I'm actually the one as a claim adjuster paying the money out. I'm making the decision on how much I'm going to pay for this slip and fall, for this accident. So I might as well be an attorney and do what they're doing. So I started going to law school at night, and I did this all while still living in East Cleveland. And the unfortunate part about that, and I know in the questionnaire there's the question about my mom and my father. The unfortunate part is that both my parents had passed away by the time I made it to law school. My father, he lasted the longest, but my mom, whom I lived with the majority of my life, she raised me by herself after my father and her separated. She was not able to see me make it to law school, which is a little sad because I have a brother who also was raised in East Cleveland, who turned out to be a very successful young man, and she witnessed that and was able to be proud of that. And meanwhile, I'm the young guy going through Shaw, making the mistakes, oftentimes hanging with the wrong crowd. So she was a little more concerned about me than she was my brother. So it would have been very special if she could have physically been here to see me get accepted to law school and become a lawyer, but she wasn't able to do that. But nevertheless, I stayed in the home where I was raised throughout law school. And then after graduating from law school, I started working for one of the firms here in Cleveland, and it happened to be one of the top 6 firms at the time. I was the only black associate. There was one other black partner, and that means he was there for several years longer than I was. And that's kind of what gave my whole exposure to the law. And then thus I went on my own and became a criminal defense attorney, and now eventually a judge.
Well, we might as well just end the interview right now if you didn't tell us.
Right, I told you everything, but I can elaborate a little deeper.
I just want to say thank you, and that was just so awesome, a beginning. So I'm looking forward to just getting the rest of it. I just feel like that's just what's the meat. So I'm ready to really get down and ask you the question. And just the first question, just to start off with, tell me about yourself and the history of your family. I know you mentioned a part of it, and the part that I want you to highlight is, how did your family come to Cleveland? What was the roots from? What town were you from? And then leading up to East Cleveland.
Okay. My father was actually born near Cincinnati, and he came to Cleveland and began working in the dry cleaning business. Before he stopped doing that and sold his business, he started working, well, after that he started working for RTA, but he met my mother, who was already here in Cleveland. She was born in Cleveland, and they had, it's interesting, they had 9 children all together, but for, you know, God's will, just myself and my brother are the only ones that actually survived. Most of my other brothers and sisters either died shortly after birth or died during birth. So it was pretty traumatic for my mom to go through that. But my brother and I, we're 17 years apart. So you can imagine that between him and then all these other children not making it, then all of a sudden here's little William, her miracle baby, so to speak. So it was pretty special. And my mother actually had me. She was in her 40s when she had me. So for her, it was a very good adventure, to say the least, to raise a newborn at 40, around 40 something. But then, like I mentioned before, her and my father didn't make it through that stage. So ultimately, she ended up raising me as a single mother, though my brother had the benefit and the luxury of both parents in the home. I didn't have that. My mother raised me as a single mother here in the city of East Cleveland.
Also, I wanted to say, if you can elaborate on it, you had mentioned it was just the two of you in the household, but was your brother in the household during that period of time?
You know, my brother, when I was born, he probably, I think he was in his last year at Shaw High School. And so my earliest memories of my brother is him coming back home from Kent. He went to Kent State also. So he'd come back home and, you know, I remember him playing with me and things like that. So we really, it's interesting, our relationship was really more so early on as more of a father figure, because he was so much older than I was, and I didn't have my father in the house. So Wayne was kind of like my father initially. Then eventually we became brothers, and then, you know, now we're about best friends. So that's how it evolved with him.
And how did you get an opportunity to be in East Cleveland? Was it something that your family was just brought here to East Cleveland? How did East Cleveland become a part of the picture? My
mother and father, when they were together, they bought the only house they bought together, they bought it in East Cleveland. It was on Orinoco. And I'm not sure why they chose that. I think, well, from what I remember, the stories, it's because East Cleveland was a very, very nice suburb at the time, and up and coming, and to be one of the first blacks on this street was kind of a benefit in a sense, even though there are struggles that come with that. To move to the street, Orinoco, and to buy your own house was a very big deal for my family, and that's why we ended up there.
And when you mentioned that you was one of the first homeowners on your street, what age or what year was that roughly?
That probably would have been around 1969, 1970 is when they got into that house.
And at that time, that was the peak of crime for East Cleveland.
Yes.
During that period of time.
Yes.
Do you remember the manicure lawns and the neighbors and all the strict rules and regulations?
I do. I remember how all of the neighbors all looked out for everyone else, the parents and even the older people on the street who weren't parents. They made sure that the kids were all in check, that we weren't out there fighting or cursing. None of that was allowed. So I do remember growing up on Orinoco in the glory days of East Cleveland, absolutely.
And when you mentioned about your family, just you and your brother, I know it's a 17-year difference. So when you were going through school, how was the neighbors and the children around your age group?
When I was going through school, everyone was still very serious about education, I would say. Everyone went to school. If you didn't go to school, it was rare. And if you were cutting school, it was almost like you were 007. You'd be in someone else's house, and you chose the perfect time to leave school. You know, because I say that because now it seems that a lot of our young people, that's the normal, that they just don't go to school, and that you'll see them out in the streets. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. Everyone had the attitude that we had to be in school, we had to behave, and we were expected to get good grades.
And just two other closing questions concerning your family. Would you consider your family was a close-knit family that really molded and melted you into the person you are today?
To be honest, I would say I believe it was like that 100% for my brother. Again, because he had mom and dad in the household, and then of course all the grandparents and aunts. But once the family unit kind of broke down, it was just my mom. That just comes with struggles. It's inherent when you have a single parent home that there are struggles, not only the financial and the obvious struggles, but even the mental struggles that my mother had to go through. Raising me on her, all of a sudden realizing, okay, I raised Wayne for all these years with my husband, and now I don't have him. So it was a little different when I grew up, definitely. A little more broken, I must admit. But my mom did the best she could.
Best she could. So I wanted to just elaborate. You mentioned that, of course, your mom didn't get a chance to see you in your high point, your glorious years. But you still feel her presence, and you still look up and honor what she wanted you to be.
Yes, absolutely. A few things in that regard. I recall, well, first of all, I'm a very spiritual man, and my relationship with God is very important to me. So I know that she's in heaven, and I actually use that to energize me, and I've used it all through law school. Even when I was competing in various competitions all over the country through law school, I always, I had something like, okay, this is my angel, my mother's here watching me, and she's rooting me on. So I always had that. Even when I took the bar exam, I adopted, for some reason, it's a long story, but the ladybug. I found a ladybug on her tombstone, at the cemetery before I went to take the bar exam, and I took it and kept it, and it stayed alive through the whole 3 days that I was down in Columbus, and I used that as kind of like the symbol of her being with me, and so to this day I have an affection for ladybugs. But that I would say that, in that vein, that I know that she's with me, and even now there's several things that my brother and I do to honor her. We have a foundation in her name. We have events every year where we're raising money and we're giving scholarships to needy children. Last year, we were able to give over $2,000 in scholarships to a couple of Shaw High students who are going to college. So we're doing that to honor her. And the fact that though my mom and dad weren't together when she raised me, she was the street mother. And we don't have that anymore in East Cleveland. That was a great thing. And I'm sure if you talk to a lot of young men and young ladies during your process, you'll find out that there were people who were kind of like the street mom that sat on the porch, knew every kid's name, made sure every kid was, getting out the street at the right time, coming home during the light, when the street lights turned on. So we honor that. We honor her in her care and her concern for children. So now we do it through our scholarships.
And I want to let you know, I can feel that it's coming from your heart, and you still just glowing because of your mom.
Right.
You just have a double smile to me, like a Kool-Aid smile,
Yes,
because I know that she knows that you're doing a wonderful job. And it's just leading into my second question. Can you think back to your earliest memories of East Cleveland and tell me what life was like then?
Early on, East Cleveland was a wonderful place to grow up in, and I still love East Cleveland. We had on Hayden Avenue, we had the hardware store, we had all the area places where kids could go and get the little penny candy, and you just didn't have to fear walking down the street. You didn't have to fear adults, and you didn't see a lot of the drug dealing and things like that, especially when I was growing up. I mean, obviously as I grew up, that kind of changed and you saw the environment change. But as I grew up, when I was a young man playing in the city, we could play football, basketball in the middle of the street, and it was just a very homely, loving neighborhood. It always has been. And, most of the kids all got along too, unless, they're, kids are going to be kids,
Yes.
But most of the kids, we all got along and just had a good time.
Do you remember most of the times or earlier memories having a good time, A, and B, what age do you think that good time switched? You mentioned about a switch.
I think all the times were pretty good, but I am a firm believer, and I know that a lot of my colleagues, and when I say that I mean people who grew up around the same time that I grew up. I think East Cleveland really changed around the 90s, around the late 80s and 90s, and it was hit hard with the drug epidemic. I really think that crack cocaine really changed East Cleveland. It became a hub for either selling it or using, or a place where people from other suburbs came to buy it, and that just immediately changed the whole neighborhood, the whole feel of the neighborhood. All of a sudden, people were more concerned about either making money, making a profit, and or just getting high. So it changed East Cleveland. I think that was the biggest change.
When that period of time happened, were you in school then? Were you in school, or you was transitioning to your career?
No, I would say it probably started changing my 10th, maybe 11th grade year at Shaw is when that probably hit pretty hard.
And then during that period of time, do you know anyone that's personally was a personal effect on the changes of the drugs during that period of time?
I would say, generally speaking, though, you can't say for 100%. I would say everybody I knew either, attempted to sell drugs at one point or used drugs or had a family member that did it. It was just so pervasive in the community among my age group in that year, those years. Everyone knew somebody that was somehow involved in that business. And if anyone tells you that they don't, they're either much older or much younger. But if anybody who grew up and was in high school during the late 80s and 90s, that's when it hit, and we all knew people who did it. And even to this day, though, because honestly, the way it hit the community, it's almost like any epidemic. And it doesn't, I don't look at it, especially early then, that those were necessarily bad people. It was just bad choices. Because I still know people to this day who were involved in that industry in one way or the other, and I would still call them my friends to this day. So they just made bad decisions. So to answer your question, did I know anybody directly? I would say absolutely.
And during that period of time, and we all been affected by the cocaine and that industry, like you mentioned before, either you was involved or you knew somebody. Everybody knew someone.
Mm-hmm.
But then you mentioned about choices, and you mentioned about being in East Cleveland. You knew it was just certain rules and regulations you followed. So you think that if the people had a good foundation, they didn't allow it to affect them as much?
That's a very good question. And I'll tell you as a sidebar, I've been thinking one of these days I'm going to write about it, because I think, just growing up in that, I think it does take some analysis to figure out what happened and how it occurred. But I really think it hit America, not even East Cleveland, America so hard at that time that, a lot of people just couldn't get away from it. So it's easy now to sit back and say, well, they made bad choices. But when you're 18, 19, 20, and all of a sudden you can make as much money as your father who goes to work, it's hard to avoid that. So, you say you have to make good choices, but then to be realistic, we have to look at the party and their age and their ability to properly make a choice. You can't expect a 17, 16, 18-year-old to make the same choice that a 30-year-old would make. So it was about choices, but they didn't have a choice almost.
But what my point of matter was, when you mentioned that it was people on the street that really safeguarded the street,
Mm-hmm.
and came from a solid family background, it seemed like they had more options. But to me, when you don't have a lot of options, the first thing come along that sound and look good, you're gonna jump on the bandwagon.
Well, that could be true, because I'll look at, in my particular situation, one of the things that kept me, as far as my exposure to any negativity, always controlled. I can't, if you have it in a vacuum, I can't say I was never involved or never had negativity in my life. But it was always controlled because I had, like you said, I had a balance in a sense. And my balance, I had this excellent one, because I always thought I don't want to do anything that would have my brother talking about me on TV. I would hate to have him say, my brother William was arrested today for X, Y, and Z. So that always kind of kept me narrow. I wasn't way out here with any negativity, because I'm like, I can't embarrass my family. That's what it takes, I think. And you're right, there's a breakdown in our community where if you don't have that person or thing that is keeping you from doing or keeping you from wanting to embarrass them, if you don't have those barriers, then you may be willing to do almost anything. So that's part one. And then part two, the family structure broke down so fast that, even if you had mom and dad at home, it's a good chance that one of them liked to party and ended up caught up in it somehow. So that wasn't enough.
And then you mentioned also, and I can relate to being a proud person from the project, we had extended family, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Then your last name, you couldn't disrespect your last name. That was
Right.
in your mind.
Right.
And I can relate to you. I lost my mom at the age of 16, and I did a lot of things in her honor. Like somebody was watching over you.
Right.
You felt somebody was watching over you at all times.
Right.
And then if you did do something wrong, you didn't want to be exposed to disrespect the family name. Is that something that's something you can expound on?
Absolutely. And plus my mom, unfortunately, and this is something else I talk about all the time, even in the courts. Obviously, I mean, you see it every day. The people who are, the young ladies who are having children are doing it younger and younger and younger. So they don't have that ability to really teach and mold a child. My mom, like I said, was in her 40s when she had me. So one of the things, two things she always said to me, I know everyone's heard this one. First of all, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. You know, most old school parents have said that. But she also said something else that stuck with me. She said, William, if you're out there doing something wrong, the police aren't gonna have to catch you because I'm gonna call the police on you. I mean, that's a serious statement when your mother tell you that if you do something wrong, I'm gonna get you in trouble. So there are not enough parents out there. I see parents all the time now, they come to court all the time where they will deny to the end of time that their kid has done anything, and they will back them up. My mother wasn't that type of mother. If I got in trouble, not only would she be the one to rat me out, so to speak, but you know, I'm on my own, and that's how it should be. And you're right. And then luckily, my brother had gave me some sense of importance in family names. See, I don't think young people even realize that. I mean, there's certain names that ring in East Cleveland. Luckily, Dawson is one, King is another. But when you're growing up as young people, you don't understand that. You know, you're 16, you're like, what difference does it make? But luckily, I was able to have him on TV, so it made a bigger difference to me. So, but I think that's something that a lot of young people should think about, your family name and not dishonoring your family name.
Exactly. Also, that leads to my next question is, what are your fondest memories of East Cleveland?
My fondest memories would be my involvement with Shaw Band, I must say. That was kind of, and that's another good thing, and it's still a great program at Shaw. When you are involved with the band, and I'm assuming it may be like that with the other sports, it really becomes your life as a young person. You're there many hours. You practice from 3 in the afternoon when school's over to 9 o'clock at night. So your life becomes the band. So for me, that was the best time being in the band. I was in the rhythm teams. I was in the choir over there. You know, I did everything I could musically at Shaw, and even at Kirk, and even at Chambers. So for me, East Cleveland was great musically, and we had some very good musicians because at that time, young people were interested in music. And even though they're interested now, but back then it was about playing instruments. So I grew up with a lot of good musicians.
How were your directors of the band and music? Did you have people that encouraged you also? Did you have mentors that you looked up to?
You know, when I first joined the band, we had Mr. Thomas, who had been a director at Shaw, director of Shaw Band for many years, Robert Thomas, and he's passed away. He was a great mentor. And then Don Wilson, who is now the band director at Shaw, he was my section leader. And in fact, we're 2 years apart grade-wise, so I always kind of followed him into the next area. We were at Chambers together playing drums, and he went to Kirk, and then I followed, and then Shaw. So he was also kind of a mentor along the way. But I will say this, there were a couple of people who were the opposite, that kind of negative influence, and adults do it all the time. There was a director who was kind of, I'm trying to be politically correct since I am a politician now, right? He was just very hard on me my last years at Shaw. Almost tried to keep me from graduating just because he didn't approve of me musically, I guess. I don't know, but it was his negativity that even inspired me more so. I mean, to think I've been in band all my life. My senior year, I almost got kicked out of band. Now that would seem unthinkable because I was the section leader, one of the best drummers. You know, I've been playing drums since 3rd grade, but this director was so, you know, really bent on discouraging me that he did everything he could, but in fact it didn't work. So.
Have you ever had an opportunity to play with the Shaw Band recently?
You know, I did in 2008, and I remember that because I was one of the chaperones that went to Beijing, China with the band. And it was interesting because we were all outside and it was, you know, very hot, and me and Mr. Wilson, we were standing by the drummers, and then for somehow it just organically, we both ended up on one of the snare drums, and we were playing some of our old cadences together, and all the kids were, you know, gathered around. And it was kind of interesting to see that I still could jam with the younger band students.
And when you mentioned you was in the band, what was your ideal or purpose or point in the band you felt to be a part of the band? Is that something because your friends was involved, something that was an attraction for you? What was your purpose and point?
You know, I'll tell you this story too, because my wife was using it the other day to tell her sister how to be unique and be yourself. Music has always been a draw for me. So even before I was in the band, I was a huge Prince and Michael Jackson fan. And my wife knows the story that when I was at Chambers, I don't know if it was in because I don't remember anybody else doing it, but I know we collected buttons. You remember how you collect the buttons, the Michael Jackson buttons that you put on you? Did you ever do that? No? Okay. Well, let me tell you, I probably had about 150 buttons, right? The Michael Jackson buttons, because there were different kinds. But on any given day, I would wear them all at the same time. So I would be head to toe, even on my tennis shoes with Michael Jackson buttons. And my wife tells that story because obviously I didn't care what anybody thought about me because they probably thought I was a fool. But so that just tells you how strong the musical draw was for me. Even before I got into the band, I was just drawn to music.
Okay. At this point, do you still like music? What type of music you like to hear?
You know what? I still listen to music. I still play drums every now and then. And I'm very diverse. I listen to classical music. I listen to jazz. I listen to Jay-Z. You know, so my range is all over the place.
Wow. Let me go on to my next question. In what ways has the city changed over time? That's part one. You can answer that question.
Well, I think, and I'm going to stick to it. I really think the crack epidemic really changed the city in every way. For instance, if you walk down any street in East Cleveland, you know, now you'll see a lot of boarded up houses, or you'll see a lot of abandoned houses, or places where houses used to be. When I was growing up, going to Kirk and Shaw, those houses had people in them. There, you know, people lived in almost every single house. But now it's kind of a lot of vacancies, and I think that's one of the major changes is that a lot of people lost their homes. And then you also have to blame the foreclosure and the mortgage crisis that hit. And that was, again, a profit-driven, thing that affected the city, where people were buying homes and flipping them and getting increased values, and all of a sudden that would fall out. So the biggest change in East Cleveland has been the loss of residents, I think, the loss of businesses. Those are the things that are obvious to see. But I don't think the city has lost any hope, and I don't think it's lost its character. You would be amazed if you didn't grow up in East Cleveland, you would be amazed to see how much pride people who lived in East Cleveland have. I mean, when we have our reunions, when we have our games and things like that, people from all over the country are proudly saying, I went to Shaw, I lived in East Cleveland. I mean, it's a strong community as far as our love and our connectivity. But as far as the economic and the housing and things like that, that has changed terribly. But the love is still there.
Love is still there. I remember growing up, and East Cleveland was just a place to be. It was a millionaire row, and everybody knew about it. But let me just state, when the Shaw Band was chosen to go out the country, and you heard about it, if that's something that you knew you was going to go with them or be a part of?
I kind of knew, in a sense. Only reason I knew because I've always been still involved with the band. You know, I'm not a booster club member because I don't have a child in the band, but I've always been a strong supporter. So when that happened, whatever I could do to help, I was willing to help, and then it just turned into me being able to actually be a chaperone. So that was wonderful. But I knew I wanted to go for sure. It was a great experience.
Well, is that what going to Beijing, was that really a highlight point in your life? Would you consider that being a highlight point?
I would say it's a very, very memorable point. My highlight would probably be the birth of my daughter. Honestly, that would probably be one of the biggest, and even becoming judge. And Beijing was just I loved it. I loved it, and it's something I'll never forget. But I think more important, if I had to look at some events that kind of defined where I'm going to be or what my legacy would be my daughter, as well as being able to be judge in this city.
And you mentioned the second part of the question is, what do you think contribute to those changes? I know you mentioned the homes. I know you mentioned the businesses. If you would say homes and business, besides the home and businesses, what other big changes that was notable that you think that still plays a part to this day?
And because you're interviewing other people, I don't mind being the only one walking around saying this, but I think I must go back to the crack selling. I really do. I think, unfortunately, so many people were involved with selling it and using it that even today you see it. A lot of young people, that's what they want to do. They're looking to be a hustler. They're looking to sell marijuana. So I think East Cleveland, when that hit, it changed our mentality of the young people. Now our goals are different, it seems. It's all about the hustle. It's all about, getting one up on somebody else. So the sense of community changed a little bit. Not the pride in the community, but the sense of community, because now it's about how much money can I make, and if you're in my way, I'm going to get you out of my way because this is what I want. So, but that's, I'm sure that's in any of the urban neighborhoods across the country, but it definitely hit East Cleveland hard, and that sparked to me all the other changes. It really did.
And with you, Honorable Judge, I know with you being on the bench each and every day, you see the reflection of how drugs has changed our youth.
Mm-hmm.
And would you agree with me with the youth being 30, age about 30 now, mid-30s? So it's been over like 20 years now, and we still have the same effect. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah.
And would you agree, another point is, it's now about the hustle, but would you agree if you can work the streets, you can definitely work the suites because it's the same concept. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I tell that to young people all the time. You know, the intelligence that it takes to be a hustler and to, you know, to navigate that. If you transfer it into the business world or something positive, you can be very successful. I believe so.
And what do you make emphasis to your clients that come in front of you that part can be transferred from the main street to Wall Street?
Right, right. And it's two ways. You know, I try to tell them, one, first of all, don't get involved with it if you can. Stay away from it. Two, if you have made that mistake, I tell them in the program I do every month here at the court that today is the very first day of the rest of your life. And it may sound cliche, but it's so true. And I see it now as a judge. If today is Tuesday, if I did something on yesterday, Monday, I could say, okay, Tuesday, I sat down, I did this interview, all of a sudden something sparked in me. I'm never going back to what I did on Monday. I'm a changed person. If you live that out, then you can change. But a lot of young men and women, because of the stigma of having a record and having made a mistake, they don't see that and they don't seek that change. But you can change and get out of that if you'd like to.
Can you tell us about your book, a little bit about your book, and can you tell us about the program that you have implemented?
Okay, I wrote my first book. It's called The Legal Matrix, How the System is Trying to Control You. And I wrote that as a defense attorney, and I wrote it precisely because I realized that not enough young men and women knew of the quote-unquote traps of the legal system. And I'll give you a prime example. In federal court, I've defended several people with drug cases. And I don't think our young people realize that once you get to federal court, this is a serious game. So you may get these little petty cases and misdemeanors and things like that, but they add up to the point where one day you can do something and not realize that it's a federal case now. So I've had clients standing next to me saying, Dawson, Judge Dawson, or at that time, Attorney Dawson, if I knew that selling this amount of drugs would get me 20 to life, I wouldn't have done it. So my point was, you know what, I need to figure out a way to get this message out to the masses that, one, the federal system is stacked against you. If you get in that system, it's going to be a rough road. And then two, that you just need to know the laws so that if you decide to be a drug dealer, at least if you picked up my book, you'll know what the risks are. You know what you're facing as far as your sentencing. Then I realized, okay, the people I want to read this in East Cleveland and beyond, they probably aren't going to pick up the book. So what do I need to do now? I made a workbook, and I took that into the schools to do a program. And I've been doing programs in schools for the last 7 or 8 years, teaching them the same principles of avoiding the traps of the legal system. And I also do programs. I do seminars on it. So that's what my first book was about. And then recently, I wrote a book just last year while I was running for judge called 99 Problems, How Your Failures, Flops, and Flaws Can Lead to Your Greatness. And the reason I wrote that book, to be totally honest, is because, like I mentioned, if you grow up in East Cleveland, you may come out with some scars one way or the other, whether it's something you experienced with your family, something you watched your family go through. In East Cleveland, you're going to have some unique scars, and they make you unique, and they set you up for your greatness. So growing up in East Cleveland, obviously I've had my scars, but when I ran for judge, it seemed to me that the establishment, that's all they focused on, the mistakes that I've made in the past, or any shortcomings that I've had. So I had to write this book about how your failures, flops, and flaws can lead to your greatness, because I needed to motivate myself on a daily basis, saying that, you know what, everyone's talking about something that's not me anymore. They're ignoring the fact that I'm a man of God, I have a purpose, and that I'm doing this for a reason in East Cleveland. I'm not running for judge just to be judge. I'm doing it in this city where I was born and raised so I can help change the city. So I had to focus on that, and that's why I wrote my second book.
Just to piggyback on a couple of things that you had mentioned, how do you have time to do everything that you want to do, have a wife and a child and a family, and then take on East Cleveland? First question is, How do you have the time?
Well, you know, I have a lot of energy. I get up really, really early in the morning. I go to bed late. I've been blessed with a lot of energy, I must say that. But as I was driving into work today, and I was just kind of thinking about last night and when I was playing with my daughter, I finally realized, I'm like, man, I'm that guy who's now saying how important family is, because that I realize that those are the good times, you know, when you're with your family, because these times can be challenging when you're at work and when you're trying to accomplish all these other things. It can be challenging. But just to answer your question directly, I've been blessed with a lot of energy, and I want to keep on moving. You know, I'll tell you this too. It's almost like since I've been elected judge, I'm having an outer body experience in the sense that I'm looking at myself saying, wow, he's really moving fast. He's trying to establish this new emotional intelligence, criminal behavior docket. I'm writing another manual on criminal behavior and emotional intelligence that I plan to have done by September, that's going to be free to the community. And I'm doing all these things, and I'm looking at myself like, you know, what's the rush? You know, what's the rush, Judge? And it's almost as if I need to get this out, you know, so I'm just going to use all the energy that I have to try and create the legacy so that when I'm done here, that I have something left to encourage generations coming up after me.
And I just feel this way with you and my colleague, Brandon King, and myself. We're doing a lot, and you find most people not doing anything.
Yeah. Right.
And you talk to them, what you doing? They're not doing anything. So I just wanted to know, you spoke about your family and your mom and your brother keeping you motivated. But what is the whisper in your ear day or night just to keep you going? What keeps you pumped?
You know, I'll tell you, and I know people probably claim this all the time, but I pray pretty much all day. Every day, all day, I'm praying and I'm talking to God and I'm saying, you know what, Lord, let your will be done. Before I walk out this door and hit the bench, every time, you know, I have to put on the robe and I look in the mirror, and it's not to say, you know, Judge Dawson's looking smooth. It's more so, you know, Lord, let me do your will out here, not my will. Let me be a blessing to someone. So I think it's the constant connection to the higher being, to the higher power, that keeps me motivated. You know, even beyond my family, it's just wanting to do well, because I'm flawed like everybody else. But as long as you know, I'm moving with the intention of trying to do the best I can for everybody, then hopefully that'll overcome my flaws.
And my other question is, with that wonderful statement that you mentioned, I think that's one of the areas that our young people don't realize. It's that spiritual part. And they don't realize, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, material things come and go. You can have the biggest and the brightest and the best of everything, but you're still not happy.
Absolutely.
So you have to have something to fulfill that hole. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And we see it all the time, where these stars who are, you know, overdosing on drugs and things like that, the material things, they will not fulfill you. They will not fulfill you. It's all about, you know, having a purpose and living out your purpose. And what young people don't realize too is that your purpose can change. You know, you don't have to say, and that's, I think they get caught up in that. They don't, well, I don't know what I want to be. Well, what do you want to do right now? Do you want to finish school? Let that be your purpose. I want to go to the next grade. I want to get all A's. Let that be your purpose. And it can change, but as long as you have that purpose and you're connected with God and trying to do good by everybody else, that will fulfill you, but not the material things.
And this is my closing question. I'm going to go to my next question is, do you have an opportunity to talk to the people in front of you? And if you do, how long do you usually tell your personal story?
I do. I make sure that I have an opportunity to talk. That's one of the, I think that's the blessing of having this position. And I think that's the power of having a male in this position. And I'm always, you know, a little leery of saying that because I don't want to seem sexist or anything like that. But there has been a woman on the bench in East Cleveland probably for the last 27 years or so. And there is something to be said about a man being in that position to influence young men in the community. So I take every opportunity I can to speak life into the people that come before me. I don't care if they're, you know, 18. I even deal with the truancy cases because, you know, we're not a juvenile court, but I do see the kids on truancy and things like that. So they could be 14, 15, 16. I'll talk with them. Or they can be as old as 60, 70. And I will speak life because it doesn't matter how old you are. It's just the message that you're conveying. And if it's something that needs to be said, I will say it. So I make sure I take the time to do that every day.
Can you open up the jails in East Cleveland and let people come to view or walk through?
Well, you know, it's interesting because the jail is a partnership between the city and the court. we utilize it, but it technically belongs to the city. So when people complain about the conditions of the jail, they really should be talking to the mayor. But in actuality, that's something I think people would benefit from, because anybody that comes upstairs from in East Cleveland's jail, they always say they don't want to go back. I mean, you have folks who don't mind, but the majority of people don't like it down there. They don't like it in our jails, and that's what it should be. You know, you don't want a generation of people who don't mind going to jail, and I think that's become the culture of our young people. It's almost like a badge of honor. Not East Cleveland's jail, but jail in general. It's not a big deal. So maybe seeing East Cleveland's jail could change that.
Is it at one point that the people were allowed to go into the jail, and is the jailhouse in this particular building, East Cleveland City Hall?
Yeah, the jail is actually in the City Hall in the basement, and I don't believe there ever was a time where there was, it was a known public venue where you can come and visit. I think if it's done, it's done on the very limited basis, and it's very controlled, because it's still a small jail, and the facility is not built so that it could be like, for instance, some of the larger facilities, you can actually tour it in a sense. But East Cleveland's jail is so small that it's almost in and out, and it's very confined. But one thing I'll always invite the community to come to the court so they can see how the court is operating. You'll see the jail cases come up. You'll see what happens when you don't obey the law, or you'll just see what's happening in your community. And I think that's important to do.
With that being said, would you ever allow the community under your watch to just come and see? Now, it's okay to read about it, just to know that it's an open tour, to see how things operate. And I know it's open to come to the court. What about if you can collaborate with someone, even if it's not here, that people can come and tour? Because it may be out of reach for them to read about it or talk about it, but visual, nothing can beat a picture.
Right.
Is that something would be considered?
Yeah, and I know that's done in collaboration with some of the bigger facilities, like the main jail houses and prisons. That's done all the time, and we actually can help coordinate that. But here in East Cleveland, I would be willing, but I'm not sure with the way the city is designed right now, as far as the staffing, the police staff. I don't know if it's something that could be done in the near future in this particular facility, only because I know that the jailers are on a very tight schedule, as far as, because I know some of the police officers, we don't have the same force that we used to have. So we don't have the same enforcements downstairs in the jail area. So I don't know if it'll be in this particular facility, but that's something that can always be arranged with the larger facilities, which may have a bigger impact anyway, because you have people who are there for years and years.
I remember being in another city, the city of Atlanta. They had a program called Scare Straight.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have that program here, or can that be implemented?
There are organizations who still do those types of programs for the youth. And I'm not sure exactly who's doing it, but I know out of the juvenile court that's being done for the youth, and it's done at the larger prisons, maybe even at the county jail also.
Do you collaborate with other judges throughout other cities?
Yes. I make sure that I have an open line of communication with the nearby judges. That's most important because we're so close with Cleveland Heights and South Euclid and the city of Euclid, but I definitely make sure that our lines of communications are open.
And what have you started since you've been you've been sitting on the bench for how long now?
It's been a little over 6 months.
Okay. How has it been what you expected it to be?
It has been. It's been more. I've had the opportunity, I believe, to actually do good and touch some lives positively. That's what I've wanted to do, and I've been able to do it. So I'm very satisfied. I tell myself every day that this is such a huge blessing to have this position, so I don't let it in any way get to my head. I know that I'm here to serve. So if I'm not doing well for the people, then I shouldn't be here. But I feel really blessed. And like I said, I've been moving fast. I implemented my Finish First program, which we do every second Monday, and that's open to the public also. Every second Monday at 5:30, it's called the Finish First program, and it's designed to give the community and or offenders ways of how to deal with the legal system without having a negative interaction with the legal system. So I have that program, and then I have the expanded emotional intelligence criminal behavior docket that I'm establishing. So I've been moving pretty fast, and I'm doing a lot of good things. So I believe the city should be very proud and be very satisfied with their new judge.
That's good. The next question is, how has race and racism impacted you personally, and how has it impacted East Cleveland?
I think East Cleveland, to speak on East Cleveland first, it has a huge impact on us. And I think it's mainly because of the things that go on in East Cleveland. So, we have to take responsibility for, the situation that we're in, especially when it comes to racial profiling and things like that. When you see the buildings and the developments that are coming down from University Circle, and as you get further in East Cleveland, even myself driving in East Cleveland, you see certain behaviors that you say, man, they may not want to continue to move down this way because we act a certain way. So I think racism has had an impact, especially on development in East Cleveland, but it's something that we can control. I think that once we get a grip on our younger people or our disenfranchised people, and we start acting with the pride and the intelligence that we have in East Cleveland and as a people, then I think we can get rid of the racism. I mean, you won't be able to kill it altogether. And then me personally, I would say it hasn't affected me in any dramatic way. I've gone through the standard, racism of, I'm the only black at this job, I'm the only black at that job. I may not get this assignment because I'm the young black attorney and they may not trust me, but I have never, ever allowed it to go in my mind and slow me down with anything. I've never set any limitations on myself based on racism. I've never said that I can't do this because a certain race won't allow me to do it. I've just bowed ahead and blasted through any wall the best I could, and I've never used racism as an excuse. I've always used any challenges as a way to build myself up and come back stronger for the next time, so I can't be denied. And that's where we are at this point, I think, in America. If you position yourself, you can't be denied. It's those of us who aren't as aggressive as we need to be, or like you said, those of us who aren't trying or don't think we can, we're the ones who are being denied every day. But if you have the internet now, you have businesses, you can start your own business, you can make your own way to the point where you can't be denied. And that's another message I want to send to our youth, that if you position yourself, you won't be denied.
When you mention about at this point in your life, race hasn't impacted you, do you agree that education has a lot to do with race? Because I'm just looking at your plaques on the wall. Would you agree education has a lot to do with it? And also, would you agree that with the internet, it's really an even playing field? Can you elaborate on it?
It's definitely an even playing field now because the internet is such that you can start a business and no one has to even know who you are. For instance, Facebook, which is so hugely popular, if you have a problem with Facebook, you can't call them. You have to email them. So the internet is their business altogether, 100%. And then even when you look at situations like, what we can do in the city of East Cleveland as far as establishing our own businesses and things like that, it's the same situation, that if you are determined to do it, then you can. You absolutely can.
But what about education? How would that make it?
Education, it is important. And I would say that's almost like the starting point. For instance, the education now gets you in the door. That's the best way to get in the door. But it doesn't guarantee anything. You still have to have that initiative, that self-starting ability, but it does help you get in the door without a doubt. And a lot of our young people are eliminating themselves so early because they drop out of school. And if you drop out of school and you don't have a plan to get involved in this system called America, then you're setting yourself up to fail. I mean, there are so many other people, they may not be African American, who have dropped out of school and become hugely successful, but that's because they had a plan. Our young people, we drop out of school and we don't have a plan. So education is absolutely important because it gets you to the door. It may even get you in the door. But once you get in the door, you still have to use your God-given talents. You have to use your ability to relate to people, to have people invest in you to get to the next level.
When you have the young people come in front of you, when you talk about education and not having a plan, what are their first reactions?
The first reaction for a lot of young people is sports. And I love to get into that. I had a young man in front of me, and he was here on a truancy situation, and I asked him about his plans for college. And I said, how are you doing in school? And he was real arrogant and said, well, I'm doing real good in school. My grades are good. I said, well, what do you want to do when you get out of school? And I was just kind of baiting him along. He said, well, I play sports. I said, what's your favorite sport? He said, football. I said, I'm glad you said that, because in football in particular, the NFL is very strict about their policies. They don't want guys who are disorderly. They don't want people who are catching cases. They don't want people with bad grades. So when you think that you can just mosey into sports, any old sports, just because you have extra talent, it's not a guarantee. And if you look at, there was a young man at Ohio State, I think he may have been suspended from the team just because he was accused of domestic violence, not even convicted. So I love when people guide me into that whole sports thing, and especially football, because you're not going to be able to make it there if you don't get yourself together, if you don't have a plan. And your plan has to be to succeed, because if you're not planning to succeed, then you're going to fall to the wayside with all these other temptations.
When you mentioned about sports, I remember, and people spoke about, Shaw used to have a pool. Were you there when they had the pool?
Yes.
And that talent to be developed. What sports avenues do they have in East Cleveland now that you can focus the young people to?
And I was there when Chambers, we had a pool in back of Chambers. That was a long time ago. That was many years ago. But nowadays, there's still the football program, which is really good at Shaw. They have a good basketball program. Shaw has a lot of ways that you can express yourself as a youth and even excel. There was at a time, and I don't know if they have it still, but there was a time when we had golf at Shaw. I remember a guy that graduated a year before me had a golf scholarship to a black college. So what I would encourage young people to do is not only do the sports, but also try the arts. Some of these obscure things that you don't normally think about are ways to get scholarships into college. And then of course, obviously getting good grades would be the best way. But again, even beyond the grades is your ability to connect with people, your emotional intelligence, because when you fill out that application, if you don't have the 4.0 average, you're going to have a good essay telling that school why they should pick you. And that's part of your ability to connect to that person. In law school, you have to write a very strenuous essay as to why you should be in law school. What makes you a good candidate? How are you going to be a good lawyer? What will you do for your community? And I think that gets you in law school just as much as your grades. So kids need to focus on their grades, but also they need to focus on their ability to connect with people. One thing I really don't like with the kids that come in before my court is when I see a kid that's very well spoken and outgoing, I'm really attracted to that kid, because so many come in speaking broken language or very low or trying to be cool even in court. So when I come across the kids who are just outgoing and they speak intelligently and speak loudly, as simple as that, those are things that impress adults, and those are things that can get you in college.
When I say the word attitude and people come approach you on the bench, what does attitude mean to you?
Attitude is everything in a sense. There's a board I have in my courtroom, and every 2 months or so I change the message on the board. My theory is if you're going to be sitting in court for 2 hours, you might as well see something that's going to penetrate your brain while you're sitting there. So it changes. But the very first thing I put on there is that your attitude determines your altitude, and we've heard that before. But it's so true. Your attitude is going to determine what happens not only in this court in the next 5-10 minutes, but also in life. So I think young people and all of us older, we all need to realize that our attitudes are so very important. I was at a Burger King the other day. Young man had a great attitude. I mean, we were just talking about the new burger, or even though I don't eat red meat, that was coming out, and I was like, man, this young man, he doesn't realize, but the right person can come in here and he's going to get a new job. He's going to get a better position because he can connect with people. So your attitude is very important.
Can you feel a person as they come to your bench? Can you pretty much?
Absolutely. Their energy, because what you have on the inside is going to come out eventually. So while they're walking up to the bench, while they're talking to me, I can feel the energy, whether it's good or bad. And unfortunately, that we're human, so I react to the energy that they're giving me. So it can determine your outcome. So if you walk up to the bench and you're smiling, then I'm probably going to smile too, and I'm going to want you to walk away smiling the best I can. But if you're walking up there with an attitude, then I'm not going to have any reason to, my emotions are not going to be sparked to give you any type of extra consideration, shall I say.
Can you tell us a recent case that a person came to you with a bad attitude and you had to just say, wait a minute, let's just stop right here, get that together, and then move on?
It happens all the time, and I'll tell you, there's a recent trend of cases that come before the court, and it's respectfully based on different constitutional beliefs. There are people who believe certain things with the Constitution that they may or may not have to abide by the laws in Ohio or United States or even in East Cleveland. And oftentimes those individuals come to the court ready to fight. So when they walk up, they have an attitude, they have a frown on their face. And those are the times that it gets kind of, testy in the courtroom. But I've had even some of those individuals with those beliefs come up and still have a pleasant attitude. And it makes it a pleasant, outcome. Even if I may not agree with you, we're not disrespecting each other. You're not getting the worst end of it. I'm not getting the worst. So attitude is so important, but I have to deal with that pretty much on a daily basis.
And my next question is, how has inequality impacted you personally, and how has it impacted the city of East Cleveland?
For me personally, I guess I have these positive, blinders on, looking for the positive in all the negatives. I don't believe that any inequality has really affected me in a sense, because I refuse to let it affect me. Like I said, it's not that, and I want to be clear too, it's not that I don't acknowledge that racism exists, because it does 100%, but I've always tried to figure a way around it for me personally. I haven't allowed it to stop me. And I think it's the same thing with East Cleveland. There's no reason why East Cleveland can't be a Harlem, a modern day Harlem. There's no reason why we can't go through the East Cleveland Renaissance and build again. I don't think there's anything stopping us but ourselves. Ourselves, our judges, our mayors, our leaders, our council, we're stopping each other. So I don't want to buy into that inequality is holding East Cleveland back.
I do agree, but by the same token, East Cleveland was the place to be before the drug or cocaine epidemic hit East Cleveland. Would you agree or disagree, I think, with the percentage of people being in East Cleveland, and East Cleveland is 3,000 at one point, or 5,000 was the maximum amount of people here?
No, we've had as much as over 20, about 26, 27,000.
What year was that guesstimate?
I don't know what year that was though, and then it's constantly declined since then.
Okay. At that point, it was still prime at one point. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And with in the 80s that you mentioned that the cocaine took an effect on East Cleveland, is that the point when people came in with a different attitude, or was the same people here? I
think the people came in with a different attitude, and then I think also for those who weren't as when I say hardcore East Clevelanders, I mean those who are, this is my city, I'm not leaving. It stopped being a place to be. Like you said you remember East Cleveland being the place to be. Well, all of a sudden, the perception from the outside is, no, that's not the place to be anymore. In fact, I want to get out of East Cleveland. There were a lot of people who were trying to get out of East Cleveland for various reasons, and I think that also helped with or caused a decline in population.
When you mentioned that it's once a year, most of the East Cleveland get back together as a reunion, has that attitude changed from when you was growing up? Is it still that hype that we still part of East Cleveland, that we don't live here anymore, or maybe have any connection? Do you still feel that love and family and connection?
Absolutely. I think it's very strong, and if you were there and if you come this year, you'll witness it. And I think it's just more so of what's ingrained in you from growing up in an all-black community, where there was love and there were resources, and the school was great, and the band was great, the football team was great, the swim team. I mean, so growing up in a city like that, no matter where you've gone to in your life, you can always relate back to the days when you grew up in that great black city, because that's what we've always been.
And when you mentioned about East Cleveland, the inequality that impacted East Cleveland, what would you suggest, or what is the sense on the street, what impacted East Cleveland, that inequality?
Well, remember, because see, I don't believe it's really been the inequality. I think we as residents of East Cleveland have allowed the city to get to the point where it is. For instance, not being involved in politics, meaning not being actively involved in who you are electing to, your judgeship or council or mayor, sitting back and just being complacent. Sitting back and, I know it was rough if you go back to the 80s and 90s and say, well, you could have took your streets back because it would have been rough to do it then. But still, I think the complacency of the city is what's put us where we are. I really don't believe there's been any inequality. I don't think that there's a larger system that has just said we're going to deny East Cleveland. I think if East Cleveland, if we get ourselves together, we can't be denied.
What was the driving force for you when you was running for judge that people came together? Because to me, and I remember you personally being out, you really did a lot on your own. You didn't have the grandstand campaign office, the grandstand manager. You didn't have the grandstand power. What was the force that kept you moving forward no matter what?
I was lucky to have a nice little small office, though. One of the East Cleveland residents was nice enough to let me use it for a very small fee. It wasn't free though. But no, you know what? Honestly, it's funny because I look at the Obama campaign and I look at it. Sometimes I compare my campaign to his first campaign in the sense that it was grassroots. But then I have to quickly remember that I didn't have nowhere near the support that he had. But I think what happened was, for someone, I really believe, and I could be wrong, I think before our recent councilman has been appointed to council, I may have been one of the only elected officials who was actually born and raised through the city completely, from start to finish, and definitely the only judge to have been born here, raised here, all my schooling here. So I think once I ran for judge, there was a momentum that built among the alumni, so to speak, of the city of East Cleveland. So though you're right, I didn't have the support of the establishment. I wasn't supposed to win. So I didn't get the big donations. I raised very little money, but the momentum and the energy that the city had for me is really what got me over. I would walk the streets and people literally would blow their horn and say, I'm rooting for you. And, so it was really cool. I think it was more so the family atmosphere that made me win that election.
And I still talk about you to this day to all my people and let them know that you really won single-handedly.
Yes.
You didn't have all the fan and the people.
No big endorsements or any of that.
None of that. But what was the most impacted for you running for judge, and what gave you that idea to do it? What was it?
Well, when I first came back as a lawyer, after going through law school, I volunteered as a public defender for Judge Keenan. And that kind of really, just that initial exposure to the law and to being a judge and watching her, how she handled the residents in East Cleveland, I really admired it from day one. She always, I would say, she had that velvet glove where she'd slam you but make you feel good about it. Even if she gave you 180 days, she didn't demean you. So I kind of learned from her. And as I saw how my city has evolved, I really wanted to get involved with helping change it. And for me particularly, I felt that being judge is the best way for me to impact the city, because I see those who get caught up in the legal system. And now, from being a lawyer for over 10 years, I have a sense of expertise on how to deal with the legal system. So I really wanted to come back and serve my community. I never wanted to be a judge in Cleveland, Cleveland Heights, anywhere else. There was never a desire but to do it here in East Cleveland. So that's why I ran for judge.
Do you have a mentor?
Yeah, I do. I have a few mentors. It's funny because when I was in this program, we had to have our board of directors. And at the board of directors, there would be people who you would, that you may not know, that you look up to, or kind of, give you that inspiration, all the way to people that you know. So I'll give you a few of them. And this is important to do, because even if you don't know these people, you can look at them as your guide. Of course, the president, Barack Obama, obviously, he's a good guide to look at as how you can, be successful and beat the odds and make change in America. So, he's one of my non-physical mentors, I would sort of speak. And then I also look at so many of our young men in our music industry. Though they get a negative rap, you have to really respect some of the empires that the Sean Combs, P. Diddy, the Jay-Z's, the things that they have really built, coming from very similar situations that I grew up in. To see what they've done, that inspires me. And then on a local level, my bishop, I go to the House of the Lord out in Akron, and my Bishop Joy Johnson has been my mentor since the passing of my mother, and he's been my spiritual father, and his instructions and his teachings has really given me the groundwork to do what I do today.
Since you've been the honorable judge, have you met a person can actually keep up with you or catch up with you?
No, not really. I kind of out energy everybody. I can work, I can work hard, I can play hard, then I still try to stay physically fit, which is another thing. I have my staff. I'm slowly getting more and more people involved, but we're starting to run together after work on Fridays. We'll go up to Forest Hill Park and run through the park, or at least walk through the park, all aimed at keeping everybody fit and that they're tip-top health-wise. So maybe I'll say my brother can hang with me a little bit as far as his energy, because he gets up at I think 2 in the morning to go to work, and he's on the air until 10. So he has a lot of energy too, but not like Will Dawson. I got the most energy.
And would you state you had a person recently to come in your courtroom that really knew the law and you were so surprised? Do you run into people that study the law for whatever reason? Because you mentioned before, people get in trouble, but they don't know how to get out of trouble.
Right.
Have you met a person that really was like, wow, they really know the law?
Well, to be honest, I would say only in 2 ways. Not exactly as you stated, but I'm always impressed with the young men who have enough common sense to come to court in a shirt and a tie. That immediately impresses me, because I'm like, wow, he at least knows how to play the game. So that impresses me. And then also, I must admit, some of these young men who have these, the beliefs that they don't have to obey our laws, they don't have to, stop, they don't have to have driver's license, they don't acknowledge me as a judge. I mean, it's real interesting, but nevertheless, they come in so prepared that I'm like, wow, if this dude just went to law school or, did this, he'd be brilliant, playing the game within the system. My whole point is, you could spend your whole life fighting the system, or you could spend your 80, 90, 100 years here on this earth working within the system, being successful, making change, making an impact, and then leaving a legacy. So I try to tell that to those guys who come in, but nevertheless, they are prepared and they are intelligent. So I do give them their credit on that. But they're fighting the system, which is a hard battle to fight.
When you say fighting the system, what do you mean?
Just to be very specific, there are those, and I don't want to name them because I don't know exactly what the organizations are, but the generic term is maybe freemen or things like that. But the general premise is the laws in East Cleveland do not apply to them. They don't acknowledge the police as being able to arrest them. They don't acknowledge the courts as being able to impose a fine or even a sentence. They come to court, but they come to court to basically say that you have no jurisdiction over me as a person. And again, that's a very hard fight to fight. I've represented people when I was a criminal defense attorney who had the same position. Unfortunately, ultimately, they fought those positions from behind bars, because it's very difficult to fight the United States government claiming that you don't have to obey their laws, but yet living here. But my point is, again, it's a lot easier and a lot more pleasant to just play the game. I was going to write a book when I was in college called Playing the Game, because if you play the game, then you can succeed. But if you want to fight the entire time, it's going to be difficult.
Have you ever had a person that came into your courtroom and they were really sharp and had potential that you can work with, and you pulled them to the side and say, well, you know what, I think I need to talk to you, or can we do an interview within a year and you may run across someone that really can say a junior honorable judge, Dawson?
I have come across a couple of people already whom I've been very impressed with. Young men who seem to want to do the right thing and want to be on the right track, and just probably started off on the bad track. So I've come across a couple of those guys. In fact, before we started this discussion, there was one that happened to be at the window, so I took some time to talk with him. Unfortunately, with our young men, by the time they get to me, they've already started the disqualification process. And I say that lightly, but it's the truth. By the time they get to me, some of our young men have tattoos all the way up to their ears, all the way on their face. And that's not going to necessarily keep them from being successful, but it's starting down the road of disqualification, because when you go to get a job, you go to a school interview, people are already assuming certain things about you. True or not, that's just the way it is.
And within your 6-month period of being on the bench, have you ever noticed that the women now are at the same level of the men? They kind of rough around the edges also?
Well, yeah, I think our culture, and it has a lot to do with not just East Cleveland, but even the greater culture, the black culture that exists right now, has a lot of women desensitized to being a lady. That I don't know if that's the priority anymore. I had one young lady in my courtroom where the young man was charged with stalking her. And the young lady said, well, he had a girlfriend. He knows I had a boyfriend. I was just going to give him some. He needed to keep his emotions in check. And I'm like, wow, really? That's how you think? But I think our youth, they're becoming desensitized to being a lady. A lot of our young women are.
And what causes that to happen?
I think it's just the, unfortunately, it's the evolution of our culture. It's the desensitization of our culture in general. For instance, on BET, let's keep it real. You see, women in bathing suits and maybe even thongs sometimes on videos, and you didn't see that back in the day. Our parents made sure that we dressed up all the time. The ladies were, in skirts, just looked very nice, made sure they were the proper length. It's not like that anymore. And I think society has become more and more lenient and accepting of the way that our young people act. So it's just the generation now.
Because when I'm different places, the malls and stores, and I hear the young people talking, especially the young ladies, if it wasn't a female voice, I would think it's a man. But to me, and maybe I thought maybe there was just something that's just a trend, or is that true that the ladies is just as rough around the edge as the men?
Yeah, and I think, you see it because you see it on TV all the time, and just the mentality switch. It's kind of become a blended attitude of, I'm going to be who I want to be. You accept me how I am, as opposed to I want to be a lady or I want to be a respectful young man. I see it all the time.
And my next question is, and that was just so great, and I thank you for that opportunity. Can you recounter a memory or incident within the community that you fought for something?
Yeah, very, very recently I helped with the protest of the closing of Huron Road Hospital. And that was my very first time that I ever protested for anything. You see it on TV, you watch all the old videos of our ancestors and our relatives doing it. But I was able to finally march. I marched out there with Art McCoy and Black on Black and all the other residents who went down all the way down to Cleveland Clinic, and we marched around that building for the right to keep Huron Road Hospital open. So that made me feel really good.
When in the East Cleveland community, which is this your heart, do usually people come to you and ask you to be a part, or you just aggressive when you see or hear something, you just jump right in?
I think I must say that I fall into the trap that a lot of us fall into. We get so busy doing our own thing, trying to forge our own way, that I'm not as aggressive as I could be. For instance, I don't just offer myself to everything, but most people will tell you that when I'm asked to do anything, I do pretty much most of the things that people ask me to do. I'm always there to help, lend a voice. If it's, they ask me to speak to a group of kids, it could be 70 kids or 7, I'll go and do it. But I must admit that I don't run out to everything that's going on, but I am sensitive to the needs of the city of East Cleveland.
When you mentioned about the Huron Road Hospital, that was your first encounter with marching and fighting for something, is that correct?
Yes.
How was that feeling at the end of the day, and what was the results after they made their decision for you?
It felt really good, just to be involved and to have a real issue. I didn't think, a lot of people would do it just to say they did it, but for me, I thought it was and I still do, I think it's very important that a community like ours have the type of health care that we had. I think it's important. So it made me feel good because I was really doing it for a purpose. And after it was over and they ultimately closed, at that point I had to bottle those feelings up and just move to the next level, because again, just like with anything, you have to figure out a way to adjust and keep on moving. So at this point, we don't have that hospital. They made a business decision that they had every right to do. And at least we have the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center at this point. And from what I understand, there was a settlement with the city that will help benefit the city of East Cleveland.
Did you get an opportunity to speak during any of the testimonies or public marching? Did you get an opportunity to speak, to express your feelings?
I did. I told the story of how I utilized Huron Road Hospital when I was in law school. Living on Orinoco, there was an incident where a glass broke in my hand and I was dripping with blood, and I didn't realize I cut a couple of veins. So I drove myself to the hospital with stick shift and everything, and by the time I made it to the emergency room, I passed out. So the next time I woke up, I was upstairs somewhere in a bed. So that was my story of how important it was to have that hospital so close. because I wouldn't have made it any further. So I did get a chance to give my own personal testimony of why hearing roll was so important.
Were you surprised of the people that got involved? Was it more or less people that you felt should have got involved?
I think it should have been more, just because everybody, can respect the fact. I mean, I think anybody that lives in East Cleveland can respect the fact that that hospital was important, at least to somebody we know or would know of, utilize that hospital. I can't imagine anyone who hasn't had an experience with it. So it was a little saddening that there weren't that many people protesting, especially when I was out there. You would think that there would be a few thousand. There probably were, 20, 30 of us, so that was a little disappointing. But again, this new culture, we kind of get caught up in our own everyday lives, and, that becomes the primary obligation.
What is the population of people in East Cleveland now? Do you know?
I believe it's somewhere around 17 or 18,000.
So as you mentioned, at one point it was close to 30,000
Mm-hmm.
at one point, and it's starting to trickle down.
Yes.
But the crime is still up.
Yeah, and that's just because crime is going to always exist, and I see it every day. It's funny because we'll get statistics where, on a national scale they'll say crime is down, but it really all depends. In East Cleveland particularly, this year there have been quite a few shootings already, so the crime is going to always exist, and obviously with more residents it would probably be a little bit more, but any crime is bad.
Correct. Going to the next question is, how have the surrounding institutions and city impacted East Cleveland?
I think for me personally, I would say it's created nothing but opportunity. To be able for a young person who is looking for inspiration, to be able to ride down the street and go through all of that development that's happening in University Circle, all those fantastic artistic buildings that are being erected down there, everything that's going on that way, I would be totally inspired. So I would say that's positively affected our community. Now, other than that, just the fact that people have left East Cleveland for surrounding communities, that's had a negative impact. So the outside communities have had a negative impact in the sense that our people have left. But if you look at it from a positive standpoint, there's nothing but inspiration as to what can be accomplished and what can be done if you at least expand your mind beyond East Cleveland.
Besides the University Circle area you mentioned, what other cities do you think that impacted East Cleveland as a whole for the positive?
I think University obviously is an easy one. I don't believe there are any other necessary strong partnerships that you can see an impact. I know there's cooperation. For instance, Councilman Conwell is often, stumping the ground for East Cleveland for various causes from his ward in Cleveland. I know through our court, we definitely have a good relationship with the city of Euclid as well as Cleveland Heights. But I don't think that any of those have been impacts that you can actually see in East Cleveland at all. I think the biggest impact would be what's happening with University Circle, because they're actually, in a sense, becoming a partner. And that's what you need to see an impact. So other than that, I think the other cities have just been growing around us. And so if there's any impact, it's been the fact that people who don't see the ability to achieve in East Cleveland have moved to these other cities.
Next question. What is your vision for the future of East Cleveland, part one? And tell us about a major issues that needs addressing in order to better your community, your neighborhood, and your city.
I think for the second question, I think what needs to happen to better our community is for our residents to get committed to making sure that the city as a whole moves forward. This is a small city, and we need every resident to get on board and be involved with the politics of the city. A lot of people say, I don't like politics, I don't want to be involved. But unfortunately, that's how change occurs, through politics, through policy, through lawmaking and things like that. So if our residents don't start getting involved, then the city is going to continue to be stagnant. So the community has to wake up. The city of East Cleveland didn't become great by people just being lazy and not doing anything. It was great when it was founded. And just to be real, it wasn't people who looked like you and I who made it great initially. This was an all-white community. They built this community up. So we can't just sit back and say, well, now I'm going to sit in my living room and and expect East Cleveland to get better, you got to get involved. You got to come to council meetings and not just come and not just argue, but give positive feedback as to what we need to do to change the city. That's one. And then me personally, my goal for the city is to just educate as many people as possible on how to deal with the legal system, because I think even beyond East Cleveland, the legal system can have a negative effect on a person's life. It can change your life. You can get a lawsuit that can just change your life. You can run into a police officer that can change your life. So I think to keep people's hope and their spirits alive, I think that's something that I can do. I think to rebuild the city from a logistic standpoint, housing and things like that, that's dealing with the mayor and the council. They have to work together, and the city has to get involved with that. But as far as reestablishing the hope and the trust and the education, I'm going to take that on, and I'll work with any community group that wants to help, school board, council, anybody.
As you just mentioned about being a part of the city and the legal part, they really play hand in hand. And as you mentioned, there's a lot needs to be done, as we know and clearly can see. But when you mention your vision, you willing to take on something that you feel already exists, or to mold something that's already there? Do you want to reinvent the wheel, or just make it run better?
I think honestly, the path I've taken, I'm kind of reinventing the wheel. I'm forging a brand new path. I really believe so. I don't think that this court has been, well, I know the court has not been involved with aggressively trying to change lives. This court has been involved with imposing your fines, imposing your sentence, and that's it. I want to aggressively change the lives and the mentality of people who come before me, because if I can change those people, when they go back in the community, they're going to act differently. So you're going to have less violence in the home, less drinking in public, less open containers. When I talk to people about drinking in public, something as simple as that, I say, what if your elementary age child was walking down the street and watching somebody drink a 40 ounce? How would you feel? Or you use the bathroom on the side of a building because you said you couldn't make it home. But what if your kid was walking down the street and saw somebody doing that and they were exposed to that at the age of 5, 6? You wouldn't want that. So when they come to my court, I'm trying to change mentalities so that I can change the fabric of the city. That's my mission, and I think it's a brand new path. I don't think anyone's tried to do it, but that's going to be my legacy, hopefully.
I think with you having a strong family background, that plays a part in people's lives. Would you agree?
I agree.
And would you agree that nowadays is so many single parents, and they really don't have the knowledge and the structure to either be at home or teach their younger people? Now, there's nothing wrong with being a single parent. I was a single parent. My son is an upstanding citizen. But being involved makes a difference, and how you was raised make a difference.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, but I think also, because keep in mind too, my mom, by the time I was born, my dad was probably there a couple of months before he left. So she raised me essentially on her own. But I think the energy and the focus of the parents today just isn't where it needs to be. Too many people are focused on making as much money as possible, having as much fun as possible, and then the kids are suffering for that. For instance, my mother, another thing she told me, and as an adult I can appreciate it, and it used to make me sad, but I understand it now. She told me, I sacrificed my life for you. And I think what she meant by that, she didn't have men running in and out the house. I can't even remember my mom ever going out to a club. And though that was a sacrifice, that's a sacrifice she made because she had a child to raise. And the result was, luckily her child was able to navigate through the mean streets of East Cleveland, so to speak, and become a judge. Not saying that's the only way to do it, but I can look back and say, okay, Ma, what you did was a good sacrifice. But that's one thing she always reminded me of, but we don't see that same sacrifice for several reasons. One, the kids that are having kids are young. They're too young to even appreciate it. And then two, again, there's this mentality that, I'd rather have me that new Lexus. So I'm gonna work 5 jobs and have my kid in 20 daycares so I can get this Lexus, or so I can move out of East Cleveland, as opposed to I'm gonna get a job, raise my child here, raise my child right, focus on my child. So, because that's my responsibility. That's another thing. When you have a child, that's your responsibility. That's your greatest responsibility.
And my last closing question, then we're going to turn your attention to a couple other things. what would you be prepared to do to participate in making East Cleveland better?
I have several things planned to make East Cleveland better. In fact, when you walked in the door, I don't know if you noticed on my board, I put up there, "We are cycle breakers," because that's my new theme for my court, breaking the cycles of negativity, of hopelessness, of teen pregnancy, all these negative cycles that we have in the city. And I'm going to have an event this fall. I'm trying to plan it now, and it's going to be one of several. And it'll probably be either at the library or at this high school, but it's going to deal with breaking the cycle of negativity or the brokenness of the educational system. And we're going to talk about things that you mentioned, how to, or what's the challenges of single parents in raising kids and making sure they do the right thing. And I'm not doing it because I have all the answers, but I think if I can pull together those who are concerned, intelligent people like yourself, Mr. King, all these people who are intelligent in our community, and we can have a conversation. Not a grandstanding thing, not a political thing, but an actual conversation where we can come up with ways to better our community. So I'm going to start with the education piece, and I'll have a panel, and it'll be a discussion where we can have the community discuss it, and hopefully we'll walk away with ways that we can change the educational outlook in East Cleveland.
As you know, and we're doing a Voice in Action documentary now with you being a part of it, you realize that this is what we're trying to do under Dr. Rhonda Williams at Case Western Reserve, to even think about taping your narrative story. We're on the right track.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And would you agree that this is needed and it is long overdue? And a lot of people that we tape stated that they thought about it or was planning on doing, but no action. And since we're losing a lot of our elderly people and a lot of our masterminds, we definitely need to tell our story. So you just a piece and a point of something great to come. And I'm claiming that it is going to be a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
That's what I'm claiming. And we did have an honor to interview Mr. Art McCoy, and he's coming back on the radio, and he wants to do a part that you may want to be or know about to boost our people to be business owners, to be able to be entrepreneurs, to be able to bring yourself up. And he's willing to be able to do educational piece.
Okay.
And also another avenue and person of great stand is Mr. Bibbs. You know, they're opening something up where the county is getting involved to bring people that you know would be a good candidate. Because we have people who have the mindset, but they just need the guidance.
Right.
Would you agree?
Right.
I'm going to turn a portion of this documentary interview to my colleague, Mr. Brandon King, that may have some questions for you at this time.
Thank you, Jeannie Joy. Honorable Judge, it's been a pleasure. You have a very, very fantastic story. If you allow me just a couple of quick questions, because this is going to go into the archives and people will watch this later. I was wondering if you had copies of your books so that you could put on the film here in your office so we could see them.
Absolutely. Right behind you, you can grab, I think there are 5 pieces there, and I can explain them all to you. You have the 3 that are laying down. No matter of fact, those 3, and then you have 3 that are up too. So that one, yep, and the one behind it, I'll explain that. And then the little one, yep, and the little one in front of it. No, the green right, that one there, and then right behind that one. See it standing up? I can explain those.
And he's going to ask you the other question. I'm going to hand you your Power for Peace, and you can take an opportunity to explain each one to us.
Okay, and I could do it pretty quickly too, so it's not very long. This one here is an example of what I used to give out when I was just a practicing attorney. It's called The Matrix Theory, The Secrets of the Legal System. And I used to give these out at barbershops, the food places, and it had all the laws in here that I thought, well, some of them that I thought affected our community. Felonious assault, how if you use you're in a fight, but if you use your cell phone because it was in your hand, you go from a simple fight to 8 years in prison. I talked about rape, things that happen in our community. I talked about driving under the influence. So this was like the first piece that I used to give out And then I made it a little larger. This one here, the matrix theory, avoid jail and stay out of trouble by understanding the secrets of the legal system and finishing first. Same concept. I talked here about how to deal with the police without getting in trouble, what to do if you're walking down the street, talked about disorderly conduct. So these were pieces that I had before I began as a judge. Then this here is something that I use today in my program that I have in the court now. It's the Finish First workbook, Strategies to Survive the Legal Matrix. And in this workbook, this goes along with the program I do once a month. I give it to everybody who attends the program. We talk about the legal system I have in here where they can even answer some questions, because you find that when they get involved, it makes it a little easier. But the book, the first book I wrote, here it is here, The Legal Matrix, How the System is Controlling Your Life. And again, I was really proud of this piece. Let me see, it's over 200 pages. Then I realized that, hey, I better, make this a little more accessible to those who may not want to read all this. So that's when I came out with the workbook, the Legal Matrix workbook, which basically goes into some of the questions here in the book. It talks about, relationships. It talks about the drug laws. It talks about gangs and how if you are in a certain environment, you can be classified as a gang member just by doing certain things, and how that classification can then increase your penalties in the legal system. So those are the things, the books. And there's one more, Mr. King, behind you, the black one. That's the little one I wrote when I was on the campaign trail last year. And this is the 199 Problems, How Your Failures, Flops, and Flaws Lead to Your Greatness. I wanted it to be very small, something I can carry around. And this is a book, like I said, it's just daily, quotes and sayings that I've gathered or either come up with over the years. Let me see, for instance, give you a good one here real quick. No matter how much they talk about you, flip the script. We have the God-given power to determine what the meaning is that we attach to any situation. So for instance, don't allow somebody else to attach a meaning to something that happened in your life. Switch it around. So instead of saying, this guy, he dropped out of school and da-da-da-da. Well, you know what? I left school, but then I got a job and I worked in the market for a while, and then I went back and got my GED. So don't let anyone else attach the meaning to what happens in your life. Take control of it, flip it around, and get the positive out of it. So these are all the books that I wrote. Got more coming, but those are the ones for now.
And that leads me into my next question, because we talked a little bit about it at the start of the interview off tape. I wanted you to talk a little bit because I think I'm familiar with it, and I know it's going to be big, and you're going to write about it. It's the EI.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That brings a smile to my face because I'm really excited about it. In a nutshell, there's been a lot of work through Daniel Goldman, and a lot of people, even Case Western Reserve has an excellent program on emotional intelligence, because that push has been in business. They're saying that you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't have the ability to relate to people or handle your emotions, eventually you will fail or your success will be limited. Take, for example, the CEO that, has made $1 million, but he goes out and he gets into a drunk driving situation, and he loses his license. Or he has sex with an underage girl. You're thinking, this guy had it all together. Why didn't he make a good decision? That's what they're trying to figure out in business. And it dawned on me, I'm saying, this is what relates to criminal behavior. And if you apply those techniques and the training to criminal behavior, then we can change the whole community. So that's my mission right now is training and giving people the tools to make better decisions so that their emotional intelligence is at top notch. So that that, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, this may occur. And we talked about it, how the precious moments between a stimulus, something that happens, and your reaction to it, within that time, that's where your emotional intelligence comes into play. What if I do this? What is going to happen? What are the consequences? So that's my new push. So I'm going to create a docket that's called the Emotional Intelligence Criminal Behavior Docket. Another reason I'm doing it is because people don't realize before you get to the major crimes, you've taken little steps. And as a judge, I can see those steps, but most people don't. So instead of domestic violence today, you just keyed someone's car because you got mad at your boyfriend. Well, what we need to see is that the same person that can key your car, your BMW, can mess up your $40,000, $50,000 car. That's the same person that can come to your house, bust out your windows, come to your house, slap you around, put a gun to your head. It's just steps. So we need to catch it early, give them the tools so that they make better decisions, help them deal with their emotions intelligently. So that's where the EI is, and that's my next major push. And I should have some documentation completed in the next few months to deal with that.
Judge, that's fantastic, and I look forward to your next book on EI. My last question, looking around your office, I notice a number of different things going on, and I want to pan your office for the audience.
Okay.
But before I do that, is there anything in here you'd like to talk about or make mention of?
Yeah, I'll explain a few things, and I know you're going to pan it. One of the things you'll see is my my little display that has my karate belts and my marathon medals in it. I'm very active in running marathons. I think in order to be successful, I think you have to have your mind, body, and spirit together. So when I when I ran for judge, I made sure that every day I got up and I ran 5 or 6 miles a day just to get my mind right. So physical fitness is very important. You see my bike here too. And then the right above that is something that has some of my marathons. It has some of my my work when I was on the radio, and the books that I did. And then right there in the center is kind of below is the culmination of my whole year of running for judge from top to bottom, some of the major events. And in the center of that picture, you'll see there's a picture of Jesus basically praying and the heavens opening up. And my title says, "But for the grace of God," because I know that I am not in this position as judge for anything about William Dawson. It was nothing I did. I wasn't supposed to win. I was the underdog, but I believe God has a purpose for me to help change this community. So that means a lot to me. And then, of course, I have the black lawyer there who is always an inspiration, of what we can do when we put our mind to it. And, Mr. King, I want to point out one other thing I think that's really unique. That book right there with the gold symbol, that's Jay-Z's book. And the reason I have that is because, again, I think from our culture, we can really pick up on some of the accomplishments of those that we don't really, you don't always think of when you think of a judge, listening to Jay-Z or being inspired by what they've done. But we have some really talented people in our culture, and I like to celebrate it, and I like to pull from all of that to use when I'm on the bench.
That picture is one that they use in sight.
Is that okay? All right. So that I knew that. I knew it was something greater than just being on his book.
Right.
But yeah, so those are kind of the things that keep me grounded and inspired.
I'd like to get some of your plaques here and awards and, of course, diplomas. And what would an office be of a judge not complete without the one and only?
Yes, I have to have Dr. King, and then I have our Justice Thurgood Marshall over there, who made such great strides for African Americans by being on that Supreme Court bench. I've thought about, I was watching something on Scalia the other day, and I said, wow, they are like the top judges in the world. Would I like to do that? And I thought about it for a second. I said, well, for your ego, you love to be on the Supreme Court. But I said, but for what I want to do for the community and how I want to change people's lives, I need to be right where I am on the ground level. So it's good to see Thurgood there, but I think I'm cool right here trying to help out East Cleveland.
I just have 3 closing questions, and just to say to you, how does your wife and daughter feel about your speed at this point?
Well, my wife, she's gotten used to it, so she's able to keep up with me, but she keeps me grounded. I think it's very important to have somebody that you can bounce your ideas off of. She probably tells me no, or no, that's not a good idea, more than I hear from anybody else, to the point where sometimes I'm like, I don't even want to talk to you about it. But it's always good, though, to have somebody who does not mind telling you that, to keep you in your place. And then my daughter, it's funny because I'll bring her in the court, and she'll look at the picture over the courtroom and say, Daddy, Daddy Judge. But I don't think she understands yet, but she keeps me grounded also.
You mentioned about the young people, the programs you want to implement or move forward for the young people. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and what is the mission and vision and goal for that program?
Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the things I made sure I kept doing. I've been in Glenville and Shaw every semester for the past 4 or 5 years at least. And it's normally a weekly program, and now I've expanded it so that if I'm not there, I have one of my magistrates go there. But we go off the curriculum from the Legal Matrix workbook. I give everybody a workbook. By the end of the semester, we've completed the workbook. And then we even go off script and talk about current events like the Trayvon Martin situation and how to avoid negative interaction with the legal system, how to keep yourself safe. So that's something that I'm doing already, and I'm going to keep doing that, and hopefully that'll grow. But my focus is going to shift to helping more adults also. Because I think a lot of people tend to forget that, as adults, we need refreshers too. We need to get that spark of inspiration too.
The Honorable Judge, can you look into our camera and let us know any closing remarks that you may have before I bring it to a close, which I don't want to, but if you can just tell us your closing remarks,
Okay.
then I can close out.
I would like to say I am very proud to be a resident of East Cleveland, born and raised here, went to all the schools. I had an excellent childhood here with, going to Chambers and Kirk and Shaw. My brother, we both love East Cleveland, and I think it's made me the person that I am today. But most importantly, I really appreciate the honor and the ability to serve my city. I couldn't imagine as a young man at Shaw, exploring different things and getting in trouble and things like that, that I would have the opportunity to come back and be a judge. So it means the world to me. And my goal is not to let the city of East Cleveland down and to take this very seriously. So I'm just happy that I've had the opportunity to serve as your judge, and I'm going to do my best to make sure East Cleveland is taken to the next level and that I make you proud.
I want to take the opportunity, the Honorable Judge, to say we are just proud, and I felt that East Cleveland would not be East Cleveland without having your opinion and your ability to just let us know the inside. Hopefully we asked a lot of good questions.
Yes, you have, absolutely.
And I wanted to bring you the hot and heavy questions because I know you know firsthand what we could and should be. And you realize that growing up in East Cleveland, you know what the mecca of the city was at one point until now. Not that it's all gloom and doom
Right.
city, because it is hope. We have people like yourself that's here and willing to get down and dirty, and we know that it can be done with all us being together. And I always felt that the dream team, and I feel that you are part of the steam of the dream team.
I hope so.
And I'm looking forward to bigger and better things from you. I'm looking forward to coming back in a year to follow up. We're looking forward to having this tape for any and everybody to view. So I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think that you're one of the great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.